G'day, my name is Greg Kasarik and I am herder of cats for Community of Infinite Colour. And the purpose of this video is to explain the nature of life, the universe and everything. And if that sounds like a pretty big ask, then you're correct. But the answer is actually far more simple than you've been led to believe, but in many ways far more complex than you could ever imagine. And as with any of these kind of things, the reality is that I could be completely wrong. Everything I say could just be a delusion on my part, and I'm happy to run with that. I'm not going to stand up here or sit here, I should say, and say that you have to believe everything I believe. However, I'm going to invite you to look at the world in a new way and look at the people around you in a new way and experience the world as God experiences it. And I'll be explaining what I mean over the course of this video. So essentially there are two options. The default really should be for any given person that there is no God. You know, the idea, you know, the reason that most people believe in God has nothing to do with an experience of the divine. It's got everything to do with the people that's surrounded by, the culture you grew up in, and factors like that. You know, it's no accident that, for example, most Americans who identify as religious identify as Christian. It's no accident that most people in the Middle Eastern countries, be they in, say, Saudi Arabia or Iran or even Israel, identify with the religion of their birth. So most people believe in God really in the same way that I believe in Moscow. Never been there, never experienced it, but everyone around me tells me that it exists. I've seen movies in which it exists. I've heard music that I've been told is Russian music. So I believe that Moscow exists because other people do, and I trust them enough that I take their word for it. The other option, apart from there not being a God, in other words, you know, the default option, is that you are God. And that's going to come as a really big surprise to most people. Because the idea that you could be God is absolutely flabbergasting. But that's pretty much what mystics such as myself have been experiencing from day dot. And, you know, I'll get to a very early phrase in what in the Christian world is called the Old Testament, and get into that. But the possibility that there is another being that is God over you, that is not you, is vanishingly remote. You know, for example, as I'm filming this, I want everyone who's watching it to pray that I hear a knock on my door, or God appears on my chair here and I can have a conversation with God. But I can tell you that's not going to happen. Why? Because God is within. God is you. God is every person you meet. God is even the cat that is currently walking across my lap. And that's why God is omniscient. God knows everything because God is everybody. You are God. Everyone you interact with is God. Now, there are two broad ways of looking at the world. The first is the one that we're raised with, and the one that is default, because of our daily experience. And that is that we're born into a material body, we're conscious because of that material body, and when we die, depending on your belief, either we cease to exist or we go into an afterlife as determined by this supposed external God. And, for many people, that external God is a very horrific God. That external God is going to put me and the vast majority of people watching this into hell. Torture for eternity. Why? Because we don't believe in him. And it is a him, which in itself is a problem. So that's the default, that we have this material existence and our consciousness is dependent upon it. And with modern MRI and other brain imaging, we can actually see how thoughts and images act on the brain. And so we have this material sense that our bodies are essential to our consciousness. But what if it was the other way around? What if consciousness exists and everything else derives from that consciousness? And I've experienced that. I'll be open and honest. I have experienced the birth of the divine, that first awakening of realization, I exist. And that's the thing, you exist, you are, and your consciousness, and that consciousness trumps or controls this reality. It doesn't mean that if you wish for a Lamborghini, you're going to get one. That's not how it works. It's much more complex and much deeper and, dare I say, much more eternal than that. So you have, as I say, two ways of looking things. You can say you've got a material existence from which consciousness arises and then dies, or you've got a conscious existence that then brings the material universe into existence in order to play with it. Now, there is actually a third option, and that is that the material universe exists and that consciousness springs up within it, just as it does in our bodies. But that consciousness is far deeper, far greater than you could imagine, because it's not just your body or the body of my pet cats that's conscious. It's the actual universe itself. So sentience, consciousness, doesn't arise from within this body that I'm currently wearing. Sentience arises within the universe and the totality of existence. Now, this is important because, at the end of the day, and when I say the end of the day in this particular sense, I really do mean the end of the day, because I'm talking about death. The major religions, the so-called Abrahamic religions, and a fair number of the minor religions, hold that when you die, you go to heaven or hell for eternity, based on whatever criteria. And your traditional heaven isn't actually a place that any of us are going to be welcome. It's invite only, really. And, the truth is, if you look inside yourself, look inside your own heart, unless you're being very deceptive with yourself, and there are a lot of people who are very deceptive when it comes to their own thoughts. pretty much everyone on this planet would ruin heaven the moment we stepped through the door. You know, we'd pick a fight, we'd get angry with someone, we'd hold a grudge because someone did something innocent and we took offence. You know, for most of us, our egos are often running the show, and our concern is us, when our concern should be everybody else. Because, as I said, you're God. You're going to be living everybody's life. And the standard that you walk past is the standard that you will be living in the future. What you do unto others today is what will be done unto you very shortly indeed. And eternity is actually intensely boring. I have connected with the aspect of the divine that has basically shut down. You know, if you want to experience depression, you want to experience it on a divine scale. You know, the meaning and purpose, that's something you need to find within yourself. You can't find it externally. And so from the perspective, I suppose, your job on this planet is to turn it into heaven while causing minimum harm. And what I mean by that is that, you know, there are so many people who are living lives of luxury beyond belief. You know, I heard just on the news yesterday, and these things always get on the news, how some actor bought a 6-bedroom home in some exotic location for $35 million. Now, how many lives could that $35 million save? How happy is that actor going to be when they find out that all of those lives that they could have saved, they're going to have to live through, knowing that they could have actually prevented that easily? That $35 million could have educated, tens of thousands of people. And those tens of thousands of people can then educate others who can educate others. And it becomes this exponential growth. And at that point, once you've turned the reality that you've been given into heaven, maybe then you'll get an invite into heaven. Because then you'll have demonstrated that you aren't all just about yourself. You've demonstrated that you're prepared to make selfless sacrifice so that others can benefit, and that you're not, just going to take what you can in this life and run with it and, damned everyone else. So, what's the outcome of this? I suppose you are God, and you're eternal. The thing is that every person you meet is also God, and I'll explain why that has to be in a little while. So, as I said before, whatever you do to somebody else will be done to you. You will experience it. So, for example, let's say that you're a law enforcement or a soldier or whatever. You're a person with authority and a gun. Now, you can use that authority and the gun to intimidate, to cause fear. Mao Zedong famously said that power comes out from the barrel of the gun, which is true. Only so long as the person that you're pointing at knows, or doesn't know, I should say, that they are actually eternal. And with that in mind, you will experience what you inflict on others, be it good or evil. And that's an entire video all on itself, but at the very least there's the near-death experience that is common amongst all, it seems, peoples around the globe. And part of that near-death experience is living your life, but not through your eyes, through the eyes of the people that you've impacted. So if you inflict harm on others, then during that near-death experience, you'll experience that harm. And that harm will be just as real as it was in your experience when you're having a near-death experience, when you're dying, as it was when you're inflicting it in the first place. And that's the reason that is it's kind of a guardrail. Because I can get out of here whenever I want. I just got to put a bullet to my head and I'm gone. So I could, and I don't encourage people to do that, by the way, because you're here for a reason. The universe often hides some amazing things behind some of the most difficult doors. But the choice is always yours. The choice is always yours. If you are experiencing difficulty, if you are experiencing pain, you are struggling, and you're thinking, why am I here? I just want to end it all. Please don't. Please don't. Please struggle. Struggle through. Help me and help the others who want to make this world a better place. Sell your guns. You don't want to be the guy with the gun. You want to be the guy without the gun. Because when you use that gun, you're inflicting harm. And you don't want to go through eternity inflicting harm, because it's a pretty crappy eternity. Now, I want to talk about a Bible verse, and as someone who's not a Christian, you may be wondering, why would I be talking about a Bible verse? Well, this is a Bible verse that occurs in Exodus 13, verse 14, where the Abrahamic God, the monotheistic God, says, I am who I am. Now, I just want you to pause for a second and think, I am who I am. What is that statement actually saying? Well, basically, that statement is saying, I am a consciousness. I exist. But I've got no idea why or how. And this is the funny thing about it. The religions of the world will tell you that this God exists, and then they'll tell you to stop thinking and hand you a list of rules and laws that this God supposedly has given to us. But that's not how it is. Yeah, there is a consciousness, an eternal consciousness that exists, but it's yours. And this is where the universe demonstrates to me that I'm not in control of anything. There are certain laws that I have to obey, and one of those laws is that the cats can do whatever they want, including walking in front of the monitor, or the camera I should say. There's a reason I call myself herder of cats, and that's because cats can not be controlled. They're like people. They can only be encouraged. And Tiger, you're on TV. or computer monitors or YouTube. Can you please get down? We're talking about something very important. I'm sure people... Yeah. Okay, so take it. You can come over here. There we go. All right, so let's get back to the conversation. So there is a God that exists. And the religions want you to believe that it's somebody else. And that you have to obey all of these laws. And these laws range from the patently ridiculous, such as, in the Old Testament, not wearing fabrics of, the same, or not mixing fabrics of different types in the same garment, that kind of thing. Hideous laws that have turned decent, loving, caring human beings into hateful people, towards minorities, be they people of different race, be they people of different sexual orientation, or any one of a number of other things that frankly have nothing to do with whether you're a good person or not. I've met countless people from the LGBTI plus community, and they're decent, wonderful human beings, the same as any decent, wonderful human being. But we have these religions that people slavishly follow, and as a result, people aren't allowed to explore eternity in the way that they would like to explore eternity. They're put in a box, and a very small box at that. It's the box fueled by the imagination of someone 2,000 years ago. And just think how limited, things were all the way back then. Most people were illiterate. Most good ideas never got written down. And those that did only got retained because they were useful to the people in power. So, I'm going to talk about all of this further when I discuss something versus nothing. But for the moment, I actually want to talk about why another God that is not you is such a big ask, and why it's a virtual impossibility. Once again, we have the kitty cat. And that's what's in philosophy known as the zombie problem. And that is, how do I know that you're conscious? How do I know that, like me, you're sentient? Now, I know that I'm sentient. I know that I'm eternal. I have experienced the solidity of my consciousness, down to, metaphorically, the core of, way past the bedrock, the core of our planet. That's how solid the feeling of my consciousness is. Now, you could put a bullet in my head and I might be dead. And my consciousness, so as I said, I could be wrong. But that means that all the mystics over the ages have been wrong. And I'm not going, I don't want to put myself on a pedestal here, but in many ways, I've been able to go deeper into the divine than the vast majority of mystics throughout the ages. And I'll talk about a little bit about that, why that's the case. Actually, no, I'll talk about it now. The reason is that it's twofold. Firstly, I've got thousands of years of thinking and reading and writing and thoughts, and ideas to draw upon. So my grab bag, as it were, of concepts is way bigger than, say for example, someone like Jesus. Now Jesus, we know, could read and write, which made him very rare for his time. Maybe 3% of the population at his time could read and write. So, the idea that Jesus came from a poor family, no, Jesus, we know from the Gospels, could actually read and write. But for the majority of people around him, couldn't. So, if someone tilling their farm, for example, had an amazing mystical experience, they could tell their neighbours, but they couldn't write it down. They could hope to write it down. They could potentially get a scribe to try and write it down for them, if they could afford it, which they probably couldn't. But even then, it's virtually impossible to communicate mystical experience. Most people are watching this are probably already turned off by now. Because I can't communicate what it is like to connect to the divine. It is only something that can be experienced. And then if you've got any common sense, even once you've experienced it, you're looking around and say, okay, that's cool, but I could very well be wrong. So God exists, and there's the interesting question of who created God, but that's a question for when I talk about something versus nothing. The problem is that God just exists. He's a consciousness. He has awareness. But he's got no actual understanding of why he exists. And there's an entire discussion to be had around that. But again, put yourself in the shoes of God. Put yourself in the shoes of the being that I was when I experienced my first existence, as it were, as a divine being. I just realized I existed. There was almost this flash of, oh, I'm here, I exist. And there was nothing. It was pure white. And I'm not saying that there isn't another being above me who is effectively God, as it were. It gets a little bit complex then. But that being is still me. I'm still part of that consciousness. I'm just the same way as my finger is part of Greg, me. My divine consciousness is almost definitely part of a even greater divine awareness, divine consciousness. And as one philosopher of religion said, it's a fairly common quote actually, but specifically in sort of discussing this sort of thing, he said, so it's kind of turtles all the way up. And yeah, potentially it is. No being can ever know that they're actually the God on top. And again, that's an entirely separate conversation. The thing is that in not knowing why God is conscious, God can't actually know that any being that he creates is conscious. And I want you to think about that for a bit. God creates this, if we read any of the texts that talk about a creator God, and most people watching this will be familiar with the Abrahamic religions. There's always a God who, creates a man and a woman in whatever way and in Middle Eastern tradition often breathes life into the created being, and voila, they're sentient. The only problem is, how do I know, as God, that they're actually sentient? The fact is, I don't. I don't even know why I'm sentient. All I know is that I exist. Remember, back to Exodus 3, verse 14. I am who I am. Now, there's a number of different translations of that, but ultimately it's almost a plea from the divine saying, I exist, I am, but I've got no idea why. And that being is you. And that's what we call in philosophy the zombie problem. The problem that I can never know that anyone else is sentient. In pop culture, many people will be familiar with the movie Short Circuit. If you haven't seen it, then I recommend that you do. It's actually a very good movie, both in the context of what I'm communicating here, but also on its own merits. It's a fun movie. But without providing too many spoilers to the movie itself, a robot gets hit by lightning and becomes sentient. And a big question in the movie is the robot actually sentient, or does it appear to be sentient? Because with modern computers, they're getting increasingly close to passing what we call the Turing test. And the Turing test is the point at which a modern computer, or any computer, can fool an ordinary human into thinking that it is actually sentient, that it is actually thinking, and that it's not actually just going off programmed or responses that it's learnt through machine learning. So because God doesn't know why he's sentient, the only way that God can actually know that a creature that is created is sentient is by stepping into its shoes. And interestingly enough, that's also a requirement for God to be omniscient. Now, one could argue, well, hang on. Maybe God can create another being identical to himself. And let's run with that for a second. Again, we still have the zombie problem. But now you have two gods. So which is the top god? And why? And would God actually do that? I don't know. But, at no point can God get away from the zombie problem. Now, the reason that I know that everyone watching this is sentient is twofold. Firstly, I'm sentient. I'm conscious. I have self-awareness. I have awareness of others. I have empathy for others. And now let's assume that I'm wrong. Let's assume that there is no God. If I'm conscious, then I'm conscious because I have a particular brain that gives me a particular level of consciousness. And you've got the same brain, for all intents and purposes, biologically, that I've got. Obviously not identical in terms of neural connections and genetic foundations and things like that, but close enough that we, certainly close enough that we can have this conversation. And so effectively we have this situation where in order for God to be omniscient, he must know everything. And in philosophy, there are a couple of ways. Well, actually, no, in philosophy, for the most part, there's one way of describing omniscience. And it's what I call weak omniscience. And that is that God simply knows the truth value of every proposition. So if I come out with a statement, for example, that a girl that I know called Kate is 64 kilos in weight and is 170 centimetres tall. So with your standard weak omniscience, God would know whether that was true. So God would know, for example, yeah, Kate is 64 kilos and 170 centimetres tall. Now, let's say that Kate is not 64 kilos. Let's say she's 60 kilos. God would know that the proposition that she was 64 kilos is wrong, is false. Now, also God would know, because obviously things like weight fluctuate. So let's say, for example, obviously when she was a baby and a toddler, there would have been a period where in between being a baby and a toddler, Kate was exactly 20 kilos in weight. And God would know exactly when that was. So God would know exactly the times that those were. Now, the thing is that, if you think about it, that type of omniscient God, where God just knows the proposition, or the truth value, I should say, of propositions, isn't really omniscience. Because there's a whole realm of things that God doesn't know. For a start, God doesn't know what it is like to be Kate. For example, let's say that 64 kilos, let's say Kate was overweight. Let's say that Kate, being 170 centimetres tall, at one point had reached a point in her life where she was 100 kilograms. So she was medically obese. There's a whole range of experiences that go with that. It's not just that Kate is 100 kilograms. It's that Kate is 100 kilograms, maybe has body issues, maybe she doesn't. But there's a whole range of experiences that could go along with that. And then she gets down to 64 kilos. And now she's 64 kilos. She's shed 35 plus kilos in weight. And there's a whole range of feelings that go with that. And that's an entire experience. Now, it's also an entire experience that God doesn't know about. Because God only knows truth propositions, whether, something's true or not. So what you have there is a situation where Kate knows something that God doesn't. Kate knows what it's like to be 100 kilos, lose 36 kilos, and arrive at the weight of 64 kilos. That entire process, that entire lived experience, Kate knows about it, knows what it's like, but God doesn't. Is that possible? Is God truly omniscient in that case? No. In that case, unless God knows what it's like to be Kate, losing that weight, then no, God is not truly omniscient, because there's a whole range of things that he knows, and that you know, that God doesn't know. So a strongly omniscient God, a truly omniscient God, will literally know everything, including your lived experience. So a truly omniscient God has a consciousness that entails every other conceivable consciousness. So, excuse me, effectively this rules out what I call weak omniscience as the foundation of divine knowledge, simply because it's not the case that you can know something that God doesn't. Indeed, for myself, weak omniscience seems something like a cop-out. You know, it's what philosophers and theologians use when they don't want to face the implications inherent in a strongly omniscient God. Namely, they don't want to face the implications inherent in a God who knows what your lived experience is like. Because the implication is that that God is you. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about strong omniscience. So, as I've said, strong omniscience is the divine property of knowing literally everything that is knowable. Experiences are, by definition, knowable. You watching this know what it's like to watch this. And that knowledge is something that you possess and you'll remember, and, you know, the remembrance, you know, for example, what you had for breakfast yesterday, when you remember back to that, you're remembering an experience, but you're also having experience in the here and now of remembering that experience. And so God knows and must know what it's like to be you and be every version of you, because otherwise he would not be truly omniscient. And so God knows not just you, but every living being. And that consciousness, that divine consciousness, experiences every potential living being. And remember, the zombie problem still applies. God can't know your experience without stepping into it. And in this particular universe, is highly structured. So God, you know, just by looking at brain states and a whole range of other things that are beyond our capacity to detect at this particular point, you know, it is possible to identify fairly much what you are thinking. But again, that, you know, the my ability to know what you are thinking, no, I have no idea. And actually, that's something I'll point out at the moment. Psychics are, for the most part, rubbish. Your thoughts are your thoughts. And I can't step into them. As a human, as a, you know, trapped in this monkey suit, I can't experience your experience. And there is a very good reason for that, and that's because your private thoughts, are your own. You know, your track through eternity is your track through eternity. And for better or worse, whatever you want to make of it, it's yours. And while certainly, you know, from certain levels of the divine, I can access that. No, as Greg Kasarik sitting here in this chair, I can't do diddly squat. I have to obey the laws of the universe that I occupy. You know, I might be able to connect with the divine, but it doesn't give me the power to do miracles. You know, and, you know, for example, I can't click my fingers and perform a miracle. If I could, and here's a challenge to anyone who wants to claim that they're a divine conduit and can perform miracles. Go to your local children's hospital. Start at the first floor, work your way through, cure every child of every disease, every illness, and then go to the second floor, go to the third floor. Once you've finished there, go to the next hospital. You won't. No one will do that. Why? Because we're constrained. Even mystics such as myself are constrained by the laws of this particular reality. I wish I could click my fingers and everybody in the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne is cured. I can't. Why? Because I've got to obey the laws of this universe. And that's the paperwork, for want of a better way of looking at things, that I signed. So if someone says to you, yeah, God's 100% true, my God is 100% true, then ask them, demand from them evidence. The wisest man in the Bible was Thomas. In the Gospel of John, and it's interesting because the Gospel of John was probably written around about 100 years after Jesus was born. And Thomas doesn't appear in the earlier Gospels. So the Gospel of John would have been written at a time when people were beginning to lose faith, because Jesus makes it very clear in the Synoptic Gospels that the end times were the times that everyone was living in. I don't have chapter and verse, but at one point Jesus says, that there will be people in the audience, as it were, alive today when I come in glory. 2,000 years later, we're still waiting. So I'm waiting for someone to rock up with that 2,000-year-old man. And people will talk about faith. And I had a conversation with a former politician. And you never know with politicians, whether they're lying or not. It kind of goes with the job. And he said, oh no, I have this faith. But then again, you read the Gospels and it says, that the person with even the smallest amount of faith, the mustard seed, can move mountains. So here's my challenge to you. Go up to your local priest, rabbi, imam, or pastor, or televangelist. Look them in the eye and tell them that you want Mount Puckapunyal, the top of it, moved into the Melbourne cricket ground. If they can't do that, walk away. Get the hell out of there, because they aren't in contact with God. Because if they were, they'd understand that they have to work within the limits. All you got to do is look at, faith healers and things like that. They're sham artists. There's a lot of con men out there, and that's why I'm not asking anyone for money. Because I have no need of resources beyond the help of people to get this message out there, I suppose. Because a world in which men and women believe that their God wants them to commit gross acts of evil is far worse than a world in which men and women look at each other and say to themselves, that's me. That's a life I'll be living. And, death isn't something to fear. You know, consciousness in a lot of ways is, you know, we got to, you know, you're eternal. You know, run with it. Don't hurt other people, because it will bounce back on you very badly, if for another reason than people like me exist. And, you know, my purpose is joy, but my life hasn't been easy. There is anger there. There is darkness. There's hurt. And trust me, you do not want to be on the receiving end of that, on a divine scale. Yeah, so, you know, if you are, you know, for example, Kim Jong-un, you know, here is a man who presides over a country that is a concentration camp. Dude, no. Change. Quick. Because you might come for me in this life, but fuck, if I'm right, you're going to regret every single moment that you you stood over your people. Every single tear, every single cry of anguish, you're going to feel. However, you give your people freedom, you give your people the right to explore eternity without harming others, you give them food, you give them shelter, you give them comfort, you will be rewarded beyond your wildest dreams. And yeah, someone might put a bullet through your head too, but that's the risk we got to take. So, yeah, work your way out from there. And to the leaders of the world, I would say that liberal democracy, as practiced here in Australia, with the Bill of Rights found in the United States, combine those two together, and you've actually got a pretty good system. You know, if your laws are designed to allow people to explore eternity, spread their wings, but not harm others, then your laws are good. If your laws are about maintaining your own power, are about greed, you know, if your laws, you know, we look at United States, the so-called beacon of freedom on the hill. I've never been to the United States, but I had a friend go there about 3 years ago. And he was horrified by the homelessness. You know, he went to LA, and on one part, you know, there's all these rich mansions. And then you got Skid Row, you got homeless people. How can anybody live in that kind of society? I don't see how you can live with yourself. In all honesty, you know, you're fooling yourself. Yeah, you get this one lifetime out of 99 where you're in the 1%. But that's 99 lifetimes where you're not in the 1%. And God, do you not want to be in that bottom 10%? So you want to create a just and happy and content society, a society in which, you know, humanity can reach its full potential. That's how you do it. You act selflessly. You give up so that others can live. And yeah, some people will take advantage of you. You know, even when I was homeless, I would still give to people who were also homeless. knowing that some of them weren't actually homeless. You know, I know a number of homeless people who here in Australia live in Department of Housing. They're receiving the disability support pension. They have enough to live on, but they still spend their days begging. And yeah, so those people are going to exist. Those people are going to be there. Yeah, occasionally you're going to get suckered. But if you're not giving to the poor because you're afraid that someone's going to rip you off, no, you're missing the point, because you don't have to give to a homeless person. You know, you can give to charities. You can give to the Red Cross. You can give to Médecins Sans Frontières. You can actually pay people to go to a foreign country where they've got to wear a bulletproof vest because they don't know they're going to get shot, but they're still going to help people. You can actually pay people to go into harm's way. And trust me, your reward for doing that, you know, that 6-bedroom house that I was talking about before, for $35 million as an actor bought, spend that $35 million to pay someone else to do what you're too scared to do and make the world a better place. So now I want to talk about something versus nothing. So again, my name is Greg Kasarik, and I'm herder of cats for Community of Infinite Colour. And I want to talk about something versus nothing because it's actually quite important. A lot of people assume that God must exist because God had to bring everything into existence. What people don't realise is that there's a huge bait and switch in that. Now, this is a very difficult area to explore. I spent over 18 months in quite intense, mystical, I don't know what the word you'd use is, exploration, questioning, just, you know, exploring this one question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And what implications does it have? Because I'll be honest with you, I understand, and I have felt, and I, to this day, you know, because of the doubt that is lodged in my head, you know, and the recognition that I could just be stark raving mad with everything I say. You know, I understand the existential terror of annihilation. And if you don't understand what I mean when I say the existential terror of annihilation, then maybe you haven't thought things through far enough. You know, it's that idea that you have when you contemplate your own death, your own non-existence. And if you're 100% sure that you are eternal, and you've got no doubt whatsoever, then you need a reality check. Because, you know, all you know is that you exist. Now, so the whole something versus nothing question, you know, and where do I fit into it? You know, do I survive my own death? And the answer I've come out with is, yeah, I'm pretty damn sure I do. I'm 99%, I'd actually say 99.9% sure that I survive my own death. I exist. And I can feel, as I say that, I can feel eternity spreading around me. off into the distance. But a lot of people will say that everything exists because God created it. But that's a failure to understand what nothing actually is. And the advantage that I had when I eventually ended up exploring this question in depth, which was about a decade ago that I started exploring this question, and more than a decade actually, probably about 2008, so around about 13 years ago. By the time I stepped into that, I already had, several decades of life experience. I'd served in the Australian Army for a number of years. I had earned a bachelor's degree in social science, philosophy and psychology. I'd also earned an honours degree in psychology. I'm not a psychologist, by the way. I just had the honours degree in psychology. And so by the time I came to the question, I actually had a very good foundation to build upon. And for that, I'm intensely grateful. And for the people who taught me, even though at some points I'm sure I was the pain in the ass student who wouldn't just shut up and stop asking questions. But I'm intensely grateful to all of my teachers. So yeah, something versus nothing. It fails to understand what nothing actually is. And the thing is that something versus nothing, if we think about it, nothing and something, they're dichotomies. If you have nothing, let's just run with what nothing actually is. Nothing is a state of non-existence. Sorry, I had to get my own thoughts into track because I've found it can be quite difficult to explain what nothing is to a person who, or to an audience, I should say, who haven't actually put much thought into it. And I hope no one thinks that I'm talking down to them here. I'm merely attempting to convey what I've discovered. Something either exists or it doesn't. It either is or it isn't. And nothing is a state of complete non-existence. And I have been accused of being circular and begging the question when I'm talking about nothingness. But it's almost impossible to talk about nothingness without using the word nothing. But it's a state of non-existence. It's a state that is completely void of any, what you might call, information content. It contains nothing, no space, no time, no directions, no ideas, no minds, nothing. It doesn't even contain the potential for something. Because if it contained the potential for something, that potential would actually be something. Potential. And potential also implies time. Because if something is potential, it means that at this point of time, it isn't, and at that point of time, it is. So, for example, when I was young, I joined a choir. Now, when I joined the choir, I had the potential to become a very good singer. I wasn't a very good singer, but I had the potential. And what that means is that over time, through training my voice, through being trained by a number of highly qualified and very dedicated musicians in themselves, I was able to realise my potential. And in the end, yes, I did actually become a very good singer. I did a number of operas. I did a duet, Silent Night, on TV. Then my voice broke and I stopped singing, and now I can't hold a tune to save myself. So I had the potential to be a good singer. When I was a good singer, I had the potential to become a bad singer. And I went down the road that I became a bad singer. And I do regret that, but that going down the path that I went down opened up doors that have led me to having this conversation with you now. So, a state of nothing, not only does nothing exist, but it also precludes the existence of something. So, they're mutually exclusive states. The moment you have something, you never can have had nothing. The moment something exists, that something is always going to exist. And this is where a lot of people get tied up, because they get confused with the concept of time. And this is where the English language in ordinary usage becomes very poor for explaining what I'm trying to explain. So if we look at an event, for example, if we look at the event that a lot of people will remember who are watching this, and that is the tragedy of 9/11. The point at which, people who are so religiously fanaticized flew planes into buildings and killed thousands of people and set off wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, which in turn killed thousands, tens of thousands of more people. And, I'm not here to judge, by the way, but that event, 9/11, exists. Now, we can't access it because we're time limited. We exist in a universe where time goes from one point to another in a particular direction. However, that event doesn't cease to exist simply because we no longer can access it in time. It exists in what could be called a block of space-time, I suppose. And a good analogy would be, when you leave your house in the morning and go to work, or go to meet friends for coffee, or whatever reason you're leaving your house, shopping. While you're at the supermarket doing your shopping, your house hasn't ceased to exist. Your house still exists. You can't access it. Well, why can't you access it? Well, because you're at the supermarket. You're in a different location. Now, because of the nature of space-time, you can walk through time, or drive, or however it is that you get to the supermarket, and you can go back home. And voila, your house is there waiting for you. So basically, once something exists, it always will exist. And what this tells us is that, we have on one hand nothing, and on the other hand something. Nothing exists? No. We know that something exists, therefore nothing doesn't only not exist, nothing can never have existed. And, I'm not original in saying this. Indeed, very little of what I'm saying today is original. Much of it has been distorted and in many cases hidden by people in power, and there's no grand conspiracy. It's not, people don't, conspiracies are virtually non-existent in any given universe because, as the saying goes, two people can keep a secret if one of them's dead. But Parmenides, I think that's how it's pronounced, Parmenides. He was a Greek philosopher, one of the earliest of the Greek philosophers from the 5th century before Christ, or before the Common Era, BCE, however you wish to phrase it. And he was the first one in recorded history who identified nothing comes from nothing. So something exists, it always has, it always will. Now, one of the interesting things is that we have a binary. We've got nothing and we have something. So it can be thought of in terms of a computer. Now, a binary computer, all of the information in a binary computer, for example, information stored on a disk drive, a solid state drive, or a hard drive, the information as it's processed within the computer chip itself is all binary. It's either a 0 or a 1. That's what reality is. Reality is the 1. So reality just is. It just exists. And just as you have a 0 and a 1, you have nothingness, and you have its opposite. Now, the opposite of nothing isn't something. The opposite of nothing is everything. Yes, you heard it. Everything exists. Now, can I explain that in a logical term, using philosophical logic? No, to be honest, I can't. That's, for me, as a mystic, that's an experiential thing. I experience the scope of existence, of eternity, of reality. It just is, it exists. And as I said, there is a consciousness that resides in it, and that consciousness is yours. But this binary nature of something versus nothing, or more correctly, nothing versus everything, means that you just have existence. You don't need to ask or postulate a God for existence to be. It just is. And you can ask yourself until you're blue in the face, why? There is no reason. It just is. And the foolishness of postulating a God to explain it all is demonstrated by just asking yourself, well, what is God? Is God something? Yeah, God is something. And as I've already explained in talking about omniscience, weak versus strong omniscience, if it's truly omniscience, God exists, then that God is by definition everything anyway. That God contains within it every other possible consciousness, every other being. You know, and it's not just this reality, it's what we would regard as fictional realities, fictional characters. So for example, if we look at an imaginary universe, be it Harry Potter or Star Wars or Pride and Prejudice, all those characters have inner lives, they have inner experiences. A truly omniscient God knows and experiences all of those characters. So basically we have this situation where we don't need to postulate God to claim existence. So all these arguments from design and similar sort of arguments, they're pointless because everything exists. Everything just is. Always has been, always will be. And ultimately, you know, what I'm attempting to communicate in this video is that you exist. You always will exist. Consciousness isn't the problem. And, you know, for some of you this will fill you with horror, for some of you it'll fill you with joy. You are eternal. You can't get away from that. But yeah, in terms of, as I have said in previous videos, and you know, it is within your power to work towards making this planet a heaven, a literal heaven. You know, just over 100 years ago, around about the 1900s, the average life expectancy on Earth was about 30 to 35 years. Now, in advanced countries with modern medical science, we're looking at around about 80 to 85 years, I believe. Ironically, the United States, despite spending more on medicine than fairly much any other country in the world in terms of GDP and sheer dollars, has one of the lowest life expectancies of any modern country. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about we could make this planet heaven on earth. All those greedy doctors, all those greedy insurance executives, all those people with fingers in the pie, all those people extracting money because you can. Stop it. You will regret it. You know, yeah, in this life, you live the high hog. But is that really worth it for God knows how many lives spent in filing for bankruptcy because you designed a medical system that was unaffordable? I don't think it is. You know, same thing in China. Xi Jinping and others are spending billions of dollars to build a navy to threaten the United States. Meanwhile, not spending billions of dollars looking after the health of your own people. You have no proper social security. Parents rely on their children. But you have the wealth. You have young people, princelings, driving cars that they could never afford on daddy's salary. but no one touches them. Why? Because it's all about power, it's all about greed, it's all about corruption. Now, the problem there, because, you know, in talking to someone from China, I'm almost certainly talking to an atheist. But remember, you have an ancient history of divine connection, be it through Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism. The divine is not absent from Chinese history. There is much wisdom. Not really a big fan of Confucianism myself, but there is much wisdom to be found. So you could be right, and when you're dead, you're dead. May as well make the most of this life while you've got it. Screw everybody else. But I can tell you that China, you put your ships up against the United States, you might win. But how much suffering are you going to create? How many parents, their only children, are going to die? Do you really want that? And on the off chance that the mystics, people like myself, are correct, do you really want all those people to come looking for you? They won't be able to do it in this life because you hold the power. So I think people like me don't hold cards. You know, people like me are powerless. So when I speak to the people with power, when I speak to the people with money, you ever heard the phrase, who are you deep down inside? Or look at your inner self? You know, for years, when someone said something along the lines of, you know yourself deep down. Who are you really? I never understood. And then, as I began the mystical journey, I realised that I was choosing my eternity. I was choosing an eternity in which I could create heaven and live in it. Or I was choosing an eternity in which I could create hell and live in it. And as I've said, you know, my life has not been easy. I've been stigmatised. I've been rendered unemployable. I've been homeless. There's lots of anger. There's resentment. There's other things. I don't really connect with hate. You're lucky there. I don't do hate. I know some of you do, but I don't do hate. But this is the thing, you kind of look around you and I hear, something will happen. Someone will die in a car accident, or a young child will die, and people say, why? Why did that happen? Well, in terms of this particular reality, there's a whole range of reasons that you can point to, and it's just bad luck. Actually, very little of it's bad luck. You screw someone over today, and 50 lifetimes down, some of them will still be holding a grudge. And so some of these things that happen, there's a reason that they happen, just not in this particular world. So my message to you is, what are you doing? Are you one of the people that are working to create a heaven on earth? Or are you one of the people that are working to create hell on earth? Are you in it for yourself? Or are you in it for everyone else? Remember, as I explained at the outset, you're God. You can choose to go whatever direction you want. There literally is no right or wrong. But everything you do to somebody else will be done to you. Both good and bad. And you can go in all sorts of directions, and it's not just about good and bad, but that's the main one, that in this particular reality, we're still coming to grips with the fact that we exist, let alone that we're eternal. And there's a lot of evil created because people, a significant, I'm not, as I've said before, I can't look into people's hearts. Your own thoughts, they're a domain that are walled off to everybody. If someone can tell you they can read your thoughts, one of two things is happening. Either they're cold reading you, and there's lots of people who are very good at cold reading, or you are reading too much into what's been said. Horoscopes are a classic example. Say something vague enough, and if you really wish to believe it, then you'll convince yourself it's true. I suppose that brings me to the implications of being God. Now, I've already sort of spoken in some depth about how your mission in this life should be, how can I create heaven for everybody? But there's also something else as well, and that's meaning and purpose. And meaning and purpose are things that you create yourself. They don't exist out there. A lot of people will say that they, excuse me, I've got the hiccups. A lot of people will say they find meaning and purpose in something bigger than themselves. And often that will be their version of God. Indeed, there are, I've come across dozens, more than dozens, countless people who honestly can't conceive of meaning and purpose without their imaginary friend, without their God. And for those of you who do believe in a God, because there are some universes in which gods are active, and that's an entire discussion all by itself. There are some universes in which gods are active. This idea that of the monotheistic tradition. Yes, there's one consciousness, but there's a huge number of layers. I can step into what I would regard as the infinite, but I'm smart enough to know that there's way more past that. There are, Yeah, at any given point that you're at, there's always, you can always go +1. Put it that way. So any given state of consciousness, any given state of connection to the divine, that connection can always be deepened. You can always go +1. You can always experience it further. But a lot of people, like, connect to the divine. They fail to realize that they're connecting with themselves. And that's how we end up with a lot of these gods in the modern sense, or in the modern world. Because, as I said, this is a universe of order. It's not a universe in which gods are active. You know, if anybody watching this thinks that there is a god that is active, show me. I want to see him. Nope, exactly. Try it at home. You won't. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't experience states of transcendence. And there are many ways of experiencing states of transcendence. I use a combination of meditation and transcendent compounds. And I also use nitrous oxide as well. You know, that's one that you need to be careful with. Entire conversation by itself. But I have found nitrous oxide, when combined with transcendent compounds, to be a very powerful and very reliable way of connecting to the divine. Now, you can say that's just you taking drugs. Good, fine, I don't care. Similarly, you can say, oh, that's just you meditating. Yeah, fine, cool. I could be wrong. But the thing is that there are so many ways of connecting to what I would call the divine, and what most people would call God. You know, it could be chanting, it could be dancing, it could be singing, it could be just watching, you know, climbing to a mountain peak and just taking in everything. That's a way of connecting to the divine. You may not realize it, and you know, your experience of the divine will undoubtedly be different to my experience of the divine, and if we tried to communicate, would be, you know, at something of a loss, I suppose, in terms of because we don't have a shared language necessarily to communicate. But yeah, I was talking about meaning and purpose. So meaning and purpose is not intrinsic to the universe. You need to find your own meaning and purpose. What is it that makes you want to get up in the morning? And if your meaning and purpose is to make life difficult for everybody else, then I think you really need to have a good look. You know, it's all well and good to play a computer game, for example, you know, first-person shooter, or a war game, even a role-playing game like Dungeons and Dragons. It's all well and good to be the hero in those kind of things and to kill, inverted commas, imaginary creatures. But it's a whole different kettle of fish to have a real living person in front of you and to actively seek to harm them. That's when it bounces back on you in a bad way. The other thing as well is that you're God. So you get to decide whether you want to endure that. So if, for example, you're one of these twisted sickos who wants to torture people, don't think that there's any other bugger on the other side. You know, you're in this reality. But as I said, the guardrails are that you will experience whatever you inflict on someone else, whether it's good or bad. Now, you can actually choose to take those guardrails off. You know, if you're an aspect of the divine that wants to explore sicko weird shit, hurt other people, you can actually take those guardrails off so you'll never experience what the other person's experiencing. But then again, you therefore don't know that the other person is experiencing what you're experiencing or what you want them to experience. The only way that you can ever know that they're actually experiencing what you want them to experience is by you stepping in there. And in my experience, most of those people, they don't want done unto them what they want to do unto others. It's all a one-way street. So if you've got to the point where you're in a one-way street and you're doing things to people that you don't want done to yourself, then you really need to question you really need to question whether you're in a single player game, for want of a better way of putting it. So, but meaning and purpose, that's what keeps you going through eternity. Now, my purpose is joy. So my challenge to you, as I said, the first thing is we need to make this planet heaven on earth with the minimum amount of harm possible. Because there is some sicko out there who will go, oh, I can make this heaven on earth by killing 90% of the people on the planet. No, that's not how it works. It's heaven on earth for everyone. And it's not just people, it's chimpanzees, it's cats, it's dogs, it's crickets, it's anything that's alive. So, you know, if you're one of those kids that, spent your childhood, as I did, tormenting insects, when you have your near-death experience, expect a lot of insect pain. But yeah, there's so much, in terms of meaning and purpose. It doesn't, I saw a thing on YouTube, not YouTube, the internet yesterday, where there's a picture of a welder. And the caption is, now that's a perfect weld. And that's cool. If your purpose is, say, engineering or welding, if your purpose is to come out with a perfect weld, you're going to spend lifetimes doing that. But you want to create a world in which you can safely create that perfect weld. And you can look around and you can go, yep, that's the perfect weld. And then you're going to keep on doing it. Now, at some point, we're talking eternity. At some point, you're going to get bored and you're going to go off and do something else. But without meaning and purpose, your eternity is going to just be depression. Because depression, there's a number of ways of looking at it, but some people will argue that it's an imbalance in the brain. But in working with people with depression, it's often because they have no meaning or purpose, or their meaning and purpose is unattainable. For example, the obese. I was once a recruiter for the Australian Defence Force. Now, if I had an obese person defined as someone with a body mass index of greater than 30 walk through the door, they're not getting in. And if your BMI was greater than 20, 25, so 25 to 30, then you needed a medical exemption. And the only reason that you'd get in is because you actually weren't fat. Because there are some people who have a BMI in that range who have it because of muscle. But so that's an unrealistic goal. You know, if you have asthma or are, you know, morbidly obese and you expect to be able to join the Australian Army, or any army for that matter, that's an unrealistic goal. So someone walking in and I tell them outright, sorry, you know, you're overweight, you need to come back to us when you've lost the weight. And if they don't see a way of achieving that, then they're likely, unless they find meaning and purpose elsewhere, they're likely to spiral into depression. And that can lead to anxiety and a whole range of things. So, you know, trust me, you haven't experienced depression until you've connected to define depression. Because God experiences everything that we experience. You know, it's not accidental that in the book of Genesis that it says that you know, we're created in the image of God. We are. Although I would point out that, as far as I can determine, neither the Bible, the Old Testament, New Testament, nor the Quran contain any jokes whatsoever. So the monotheistic God, created in our image, doesn't appear to have a sense of humour. So, you know, for example, I mean, they could have put in something simple, you know, what did one cat say to the other cat? Meow. For me, a lot of people are going, that is just stupid. But for me, it makes me laugh. It's just so silly. You know, what did one corner say? You know, well, I gave it away. What did one wall say to the other wall? Let's meet at the corner. You know, again, it's silly, but it's funny. But, you know, if you look at these supposed scriptures, these holy books, they don't contain any humour, any jokes. Now, having said that, you know, if you read the Gospels, I think Jesus was actually a very funny man. Now, I think he also did have potentially a bit of a drinking problem and anger management issues, but that's a separate issue. There's a number of times where he says, I tell you most solemnly. And then he'll expound on whatever he wanted to expound. Now, it just might be the translations of the Bible used by the Catholic Church when I was growing up, but this, it sticks in my mind from the Gospels, I tell you most solemnly. Indicates that he actually had to fence off these particular parts of what he was saying, because, you know, if he didn't, people would think that he was just kidding. So I think that, you know, Jesus was, you know, probably really a very funny man. I think if you actually knew him. I think far too many people who regard themselves as Christians would, if they actually met Jesus, be horrified. Because he was just a man. He was like you or me. Yeah, he was God. But, as I said before, so are you. There is only one consciousness. It is eternal. It is unending. It is yours. And, yeah, when you go through life, you want to act ethically. You want to know what to do appropriately. Well, Jesus said, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. I'll tell you, go one step further. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So if you want to know what the ethical thing to do is, you want to know how to treat someone? Ask them. You know, and look at homosexuality as a baseline. Now, frankly, I'll be honest. I find the thought of two guys engaging in intimate sexual relations to be viscerally disgusting. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I mean, I have spent the last 4 billion years, close enough, maybe 3 billion years, however many billion years, evolving to be who I am today. Part of that has involved sexual selection. So yes, I feel a visceral disgust because it's an evolved response to me having sex with another person of my gender. Perfectly normal. It doesn't mean it's immoral. It doesn't mean that you, because you feel the same disgust, have the right to tell two men, two women, that they can't engage in intimate sexual relations. It's nothing to do with you. Yeah, sure, if they're doing it in the middle of the street, then it becomes other people's problems. You know, because then they're engaging behaviour that engages our visceral response. But our visceral response is our visceral response. And I'll give you an example of that. If I said to you, drink vomit, or drink your own vomit, you'd be pretty disgusted. Well, I went to university. And when I was at university, there was a thing called Green Week. There probably still is. And there was a competition during Green Week, and it was green because, arguably it was green because green, being cannabis, but officially it was green because green is the colour of VB, which is a very popular beer here in Australia. And the idea of, not the idea, in Green Week there was a competition, and it was called the Centurion, and effectively had to drink a shot of beer every 15 seconds. Sorry, 15, I think it was 30 actually, every 30 seconds. And the winner was the one who threw up last. Thing is, if you threw up, you could actually stay in that competition by drinking your vomit and continuing the game. Now, any idiot will tell you that's an invitation to alcohol poisoning and death. And frankly, I'm stunned that nobody ended up in the emergency ward on account of that. But everyone would watch these, literally hundreds of people would, watch, 5 or 6 people who decided to participate in the competition. So here we have something that is objectively disgusting, i.e. drinking your own vomit. You don't drink your own vomit for a reason. You drink your own vomit because you've evolved a response that tells you that if you drink your own vomit, you're not going to throw your genes or hand your genes on to the next species. Your body got rid of that because it's poison. We throw up on alcohol and not on other drugs because our ancestors who learnt to throw up on alcohol survived. Those that didn't died. So, I think we need to be intelligent. As I said previously, a good ethic to take around with you is do unto others as they would have you do unto them. If you're unsure of how to treat someone, ask them. Now, this doesn't mean that you can ask other people to do things that are that they would find horrific or disgusting or against their own meaning or purpose. Okay, remember, it's a two-way street. So if we look at something, say for example, euthanasia. Now, when I get to the point where I feel that I'm a burden on those around me, that I'm not able to contribute, maybe I know that I'm, a couple of years away from irretrievable dementia, I'm going to want to pull the pin. I'm eternal, I don't give a shit. And if I'm wrong, that's the other thing. If I'm wrong, I'll never know that I'm wrong. It's win-win. Gotta love it. But it's my decision as if I want to end my life. As I said before when I was, talking about ending one's life, I don't suggest that anyone does it outside of very limited circumstances. If life's just rough for you, hang in there, because you'd be surprised. Life sometimes hides its most beautiful gems behind some of the hardest to get through doors. So, yeah, stick in there. However, in the circumstances that I describe, let's say I've got terminal cancer and I know that I've got 2 weeks to live. I've gone to the doctor yesterday and the doctor's discovered that cancer is riddled through my body. Now, I can potentially spend those last 2 weeks of my life in absolute agony, or I can euthanize myself. It's not fair for me to just demand that someone euthanize me if that goes against everything that they stand for. So it's a two-way street. So when I say that, do unto others as you'd have them, as they would have, start again. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. That also applies to anything that I ask of anybody else. Don't ask someone to commit an atrocity unless you want that atrocity to be committed upon yourself. Now, another thing that I need to talk about in terms of you're in an eternal reality. Everything exists. Now, one of the problems that exists in our society is that people think in very black and white terms. And this is, often seen in, people go from one extreme to the other. So they'll go from a hard theist position where their God is right to an atheist position where there is no God. And, as I said, or as I've said before, I think the atheist position arguably should be the default, unless God actually appears to you or you have a powerful mystical transcendent experience that leads you to conclude that there is a divine. But the problem we have is that the world is full of what can only be called woo. And we need to step away from that. And what do I mean by woo? Well, a classic example is homeopathy. Homeopathy is basically where I give you water and tell you that it's going to cure your cancer or do something else. The thing is, we have this thing called science. And science allows us to test whether homeopathy works. And we know through multiple experiments over decades, homeopathy simply doesn't work. But people still believe it. Now, there is an effect called the placebo effect. And interestingly enough, the placebo effect works even if you tell someone that you're giving them a placebo, which is kind of strange. But the placebo effect is really good when it comes to things like pain management and other things. You know, people have given people placebos in terms of pain management, so a sugar pill, and told them that it was a powerful painkiller. And those people who didn't know that they had just been given a sugar pill reported a reduction in pain. On the other hand, when it comes to things like cancer or a broken bone, placebos aren't going to do diddly squat. You know, nor is other magic. You know, as I said, if you think that you have some magical cure or some divine power, go into your local hospital, start at the ground floor, cure everyone on the ground floor of all our diseases and illnesses, then go to the second floor and work your way up, and then go to the next hospital. You won't be able to do it. And, you know, as I said, we live in an eternal reality. I can feel it around me as I'm talking to you. It's just magical. It's wonderful. But the problem is, it's an eternal reality. We got no way of knowing exactly which reality we sit in. This reality, you know, there's no reason that quantum mechanics had to be a thing. This reality, to the way that we interact with it, could have worked fine with Newtonian mechanics. So why quantum mechanics? Well, that's because a lot of you out there, your purpose is to figure out what the universe is actually on about. And there's an author called Douglas Adams, who, brilliant man. I never met him, unfortunately. He passed away over a decade ago now, I think. And he wrote a very funny series of books called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy. Now, it did have 4 parts. Goes to show how silly he was. But one of the things that he said was that once you understand this universe, it will be replaced by something more complex. So if you want to know why something like quantum mechanics exists when the reality around us could be explained just as easily by Newtonian mechanics, it's because all of those people would have been intensely bored once Newtonian mechanics had come around and they had nothing left to do but twiddle their thumbs and tweak a centuries-old theory. And yeah, so for those people, you know, for the astrophysicists and cosmologists out there, you ain't seen nothing yet. You think quantum mechanics is complicated. No, there are universes that are way more complicated than that. You're going to have so much fun. And if you get bored of it, so be it. You know, find something else to do with your eternity. But always remember the people around you. You know, you might be a Nobel-winning physicist, but doesn't mean you're a decent human being. Doesn't mean you're not going to regret the actions that you took once you exit this particular existence. So always remember, there's got to be a balance. You pursue your passion, pursue it to eternity and beyond. Pursue it to a point when no one actually gives a crap anymore. But don't do it at the expense of everybody else. And I'm not saying that we have to live in a grey universe where everyone lives in the same, you know, block of houses. No. You know, I wear this jacket because it speaks to who I am as a person. You know, everyone else is wearing black and grey and other dark colours. It's actually a very cold day today in where I'm filming today, and I don't normally turn the heaters on so I don't waste power. So, you know, I could wear a ordinary colour jacket, or I could wear something that talks about who I am and inspires other people to look beyond the black and the white, the grey, and explore their own eternity and explore their own reality. So yeah, but anyway, we'll leave it at that. So the takeaways from this: you're eternal. You are God. There is no other God that is not you. If another God rocks up, that's just you dressed in a different way. You are every being. And when I, you know, part of the reason that I know that there are people listening in on this and watching this, because I'm going to be living the life of every single being on this planet from the point where I was born. So I know you exist. I know you're real. And yeah, you might think that you are forgotten. You're not